Hey there, welcome back to another lesson, introductory lesson into the world of Ableton Live. I'm your host, Zach Johnson, one of the Ableton instructors here at the Garnish Los Angeles branch. Today I'm going to be talking about Ableton's racks and chains and demystifying them. So this will be good for anyone who wants an introduction into Ableton's racks and how they work, and even getting into some customization. So even if you're a complete novice or you've been using Ableton for a little while, there's something for everybody in this next hour segment that I'm going to be talking about. And for those of you who are curious, if you wanted to ask questions, you can turn your attention to the page that you can see right here, which is the Garnish music page. You can actually see right here where it says Ableton for Beginners, Racks and Chains Demystified. That is me. I'm going to be live for the next hour. So if you have any questions, I will be checking the YouTube chat from time to time. So yeah, but why don't we go ahead and dive right into what I'm going to be talking about now. And let's go ahead and switch over to Ableton Live. Okay, so here in Ableton Live, let's talk about what the racks are and what you can actually do with the racks, why you might actually want to maybe use the racks. And the first one I'm going to talk about real quick is the Ableton drum racks themselves. So if you're not familiar with the drum racks, there are lots of different types of pre-customized drum racks. You can also make your own drum racks from scratch. And basically with drum racks, you can have up to 128 available slots for either instruments or samples, and all just on one MIDI track, by the way. So 128 given pieces of music onto one MIDI track. Now, why would you might want something like that? Because if you're trying to build a custom drum rack, or maybe you're trying to customize a certain type of piano roll. But the cool thing is that you can use some of Ableton's preset, pre-modified drum racks at your disposal. And I just want to give you a sneak peek of some of these. Here's one in particular called the Boom Kit, and this is right from the Ableton kits. Okay. Okay, so some really cool stuff in here, and you can see right here all these individual slots building up here into all these different little hits, one-shot sounds to literally program your drums live in real time. Okay, super fun. And then next, I want to just give you another example of where this is actually just different cello phrases. And again, you can see all these individual slots here that have not quite 128 samples, but at least 100. There's a lot here. And I'll just give you an example. This is called the Cello Phrases C Major, directly within collaboration with Spitfire and Spitfire Audio and Ableton. Some really nice cello phrases, like real recordings, all put into this rack here. And one of the awesome new features in Ableton Live 11 is the fact that you have these different variations. These are macro control variations. And in these variations, you'll have different macro controls that will give you different characteristics and timbre of the sound. So if I just literally click on this variation here, okay, it will actually change. Or maybe go to this variation. You can see the transpose change, the notch filter. And you can always experiment with these and modify them yourself. Really interesting stuff here. Okay, so a lot of experimentation. You know, a lot of things you can do to modulate these sounds and play around with the sound design itself. So it's really, really cool stuff here. Okay, so that's just looking at the drum racks, all right? Or just one small example of drum racks. Now let's turn our attention to instrument racks. Okay, so in the instrument racks, you can see here that this one's called Airtight Rack Veronica Root E. And basically with the instrument rack, there's a lot more going on under the hood that you might think, but let me just play you a couple of sounds so you can get an idea. Okay, I'm literally just holding one note down, by the way. Okay, and again, with the micro or macro variations here, and by the way, if you're not seeing these, if you're looking at just the macros themselves, you need to click where it says show/hide macro variations and all these different macro variations. But what is going on under the hood? What is actually happening here? So if you click on one of these windows, you have the show/hide device, and then you have this show/hide chain list. And in the chain list, this is where you're going to find a lot of the parameters, whether it's an instrument rack or an instrument rack, but built inside the instrument rack, you might have what's called a Midi Effect Rack. You might have an audio effect rack. There's a lot going on under the hood, and we're going to demystify that some more. But let's keep going. I just want to give you some more examples here. Here's just some, a clean upright piano. Okay. Okay, so I'm just scaling through, transposing up and down. But right here, you can see these are actual, this is real recording of a piano sound. And to get under the hood, I can actually open up the show/hide macro variations. And in here, you'll see all these different chains that have all these different types of articulations when it comes to these piano hits here. So there's a lot of really cool things happening just in even a standard piano. And again, this is an instrument rack, okay? Next on the list, audio effect racks. Okay, so yes, you might find some effects that you like, but why not combine them and mix and match them and modulate them to make them your own, okay? So let me just give you an example of one. And this is, again, these are all built-in presets that come with the full Ableton suite. So if you're wondering about any of these, a lot of these, and I'll show you where they live, but this one's called Dual Senses. And let me just play you the drum break without the actual effect on it so you can hear what's happening. Oh, sorry, I turned it on. This is what it sounds like without the effect. Spoiler alert. Okay. Again, this is just a drum loop that I got. Again, this is from an Ableton kit, Acid House beat. Okay, and now with this audio effect rack called Dual Senses, okay, so somebody actually spent the time building this custom audio effect rack for you to use in your music. Now, this is just one example of many that you can do, but inside here, you'll see these different macro parameters that says format type, format amount, and you can customize these to the point where they can sound completely different, but also you can build your own custom macros, and I'll show you how to do that. But again, just so you can see under here, the macro variations, there are no macro variations, okay? But if I wanted to make my own, I could by just clicking on New and saying this is my default macro variation, and then I can just arbitrarily change some parameters here just for fun. Let's see what this does. Okay, and then click on New, and now I have this macro variation. Go ahead and hit play. And then go back to this one. So I'll just toggle back and forth so you can see here. So there's a lot you can do just even with presets. You can customize the presets to make it your own quote unquote preset as well. So really cool stuff in here. And again, getting under the hood, you can actually see there's a lot going on in this chain here, okay? You can have audio effect racks within audio effect racks within audio effect racks. You can just keep going down the rabbit hole, which is really fun. Anyways, moving on here. This is another one. This is called the guitar reverb. And I just wanted to give you an example of what it sounds like on a synth. So this is the synth dry meaning that there's actually no audio effect rack on it. So you can get an idea of what it sounds like originally. Okay, and now with an audio effect rack. Very cool, right? There's a lot going on. I'm hearing some really fast LFOs, some delays, some vibrato, some tremolo type effects. And you can see right here, you can play around with these tremolo type effects. Reverb times, reverb amounts, mid-frequency knob. The gain knob, okay? And all these things can be automated too, by the way. Okay, all these things can be automated. So just keep that in mind as well. There's a lot you can do here, okay? And then finally, the last one I just want to show you, this is just a demonstration of the potential of drum racks, instrument racks, audio effect racks, and now finally MIDI effect racks. And then after, I'm going to show you how to customize these and make these your own. And by the way, because this is a live recording, if this was a in-person class or currently we're offering Zoom classes that you can schedule online, you can take a look at our website, which I'll give you that information in the link towards the end of this video. But if this was an in-person class, I would let you go ahead and this would be more hands-on. I would do some demonstrations and then you get a chance to actually try these things yourself. So for example, I would give you this MIDI clip and I would say, okay, let's find something called dripping keys. Okay, and dripping keys, it sounds like this on its own. Okay, so we would program some MIDI together. Okay. All right, so that's just MIDI piano that you're hearing, or strings, sorry. Almost like a guitar sound, really, if you want to get technical. Okay, but with a MIDI effect, or a MIDI effect rack, now listen to it. Okay, what's going on here, right? So again, if you get under the hood, and this is one that I built, it's just an actual MIDI effect called the arpeggiator. And I played around with some parameters here. I set the style to chord trigger, the rate to eighth notes, steps to 1, and distance 12 semitones. But also I used another MIDI effect called scale. And in scale, I literally changed the key, okay? So we went from C major. If you look at these notes closely, okay, they're all white keys here. And basically all this chord progression is technically playing in C major, okay? But with the minor scale system and using this minor MIDI effect, I set it so that it's playing now in C minor. Now, why would I do this? For experimentation purposes. If I listen to this without it, okay, it has a certain type of feeling, a certain type of mood, which people, you know, a lot of times associate major keys as feeling uplifting and happy. So hypothetically, let's say you're in a studio session and someone asks you, hey, I really like this chord progression, but can you make it sound a little darker, maybe a little bit moodier? Sure, no problem. Let me just try it by clicking on the C minor scale system and actually change the key, okay? But with the arpeggiator, we're actually adding a little bit of melodic elements to this. And again, this is all being built right inside this MIDI effect rack, and it sounds different, okay? So where do these things live? Where do the drum racks live? Where do the instrument racks live? Where the audio effect racks live? And where do the MIDI effect racks live? Right? You might be wondering this. So if you go over to the category section where it says audio effects, this is where you can find your audio effect rack. If you go to the MIDI effects in here, this is where you're also going to find a MIDI effect rack. And then if you go to your instruments panel, yep, I'm sure you guessed it, this is where you can find your instrument rack. But something that's really cool is that it's actually really easy to start building a rack, okay? And I'm going to show you the simplest way possible, the fastest way possible to actually build an instrument rack without having to actually load in an instrument rack, okay? So if you, first of all, load in an instrument. So if you go over to your instruments panel, and let's say you want to grab a wavetable and then drag it on into a MIDI track here, okay? And that's what I did. So you can actually see this. And if I wanted to turn this into an instrument rack, rather than going back to the category section and grabbing an instrument rack, which there's nothing wrong with that, but if I wanted to do this in the most efficient way, all you have to do, here's the key command. You ready for this? Command G, which technically stands for grouping. And now literally what just happened is that this wavetable has now been embedded inside this instrument rack. Okay, Command G, that's it. If you, let me just hit Command Z to undo this real quick. Okay. If you right click on it too, you can also group. Okay, so if you don't remember the key command, Command G, you can just right click on the top of where it says wavetable or whatever the name of your instrument is, and then click group, and it will automatically transform it into a instrument rack. Okay, guess what? The same goes for MIDI Effect Racks and audio effect racks, which I'll do some more demonstrations of that in a moment here, but let's keep moving. So one thing I just want to point out that is really cool, inside this wavetable, you can add effects, you can add MIDI effects, and you can also you can start to build your own chains, meaning I can actually add in more samples, I can add in more instruments if I want to kind of create my own customized hybrid sound design synthesizer with samples and maybe something like wavetable or operator. The list goes on, but there's a lot that you can do under the hood here. Okay. So again, let me just give you another demonstration of this where it says arpeggiator and the minor pentatonic. Just want to give you an example of what I did earlier. I went over to the MIDI effects and I literally just grabbed the arpeggiator, dragged it down here. Okay, and then I went to the scale folder, and then I grabbed the minor pentatonic, dragged it on here. And then if I wanted to have this MIDI effect as a group or as a rack, all I have to do is highlight both of these like this, hit Command G, and there it is. Okay, my own custom MIDI effect rack like this. And you can collapse them and make them smaller, and then you can also have more than one as well if you'd like. Okay, it doesn't stop here. All right, so let's keep moving on. Okay, so something that I want to start with and show you, there's three actual important things that I want to talk about, which is actually highlighted in the description of this YouTube video, which is how to create a chain. Okay, and not only just create a chain, but asking yourself, wait, why would I want to create a chain? What's the point of this? Okay, so let me just play you this sample that I have here right now. Okay. Okay, it's called Stage Tremo. E flat minor, 130 beats per minute. Again, this is directly a sound. If you like this sound, you can find it in the search for your Ableton Suite sounds. So I want to add an effect to this. Maybe I want to make something lo-fi type sound. And this sounds cool on its own. And maybe I want to do some automation with it where there's a section of it that sounds lo-fi, meaning it might sound like an old dusty vinyl record, and then it will open up into something that sounds a little bit more modern. Okay. You can do this with any audio effect, but I wanted to purposely give you an example with a third party effect, meaning that this right here, this is called vinyl. Okay. And this is a great one by Isotope. And the cool thing is that it is 100% royalty free. Okay. For some reason, I can't get it to pop up on my main window here. I apologize. It would be nice if I could actually show you this. Here, let me just add this back in one more time. Go to my effects, go to vinyl, and I throw it on here. There we go. Okay, now it's popping up. So this is cool. I can make something sound like, you know, it's from the 1950s, maybe add a little mechanical noise to it, a little electrical noise, and give it a lo-fi feel. Add some dust to it, a little warping, so it's a little unstable, right? Which is cool. But the problem with this effect, and you might run into this issue, is that there's no dry wet. Okay, there's no dry wet. Sometimes you might find an effect where there's no dry wet, or maybe it does have it, hypothetically, let's say it does have a dry wet and you can't access it. You're like, I don't know where it is. I don't know this plugin very well. And I need to have some type of dry wet system, okay? Well, with a chain, you can actually do that. So with this effect, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually turn it into an audio effect, or I'm gonna put it into an audio effect rack. But how I can do that, again, all you have to do is make sure you click on the effect that you're using, hit Command G, okay? And now automatically it's turned into an audio effect rack, all right? But inside this audio effect rack, I need to access the show/hide chain list. And in this chain list, there's a couple of things I can do. Right now, currently with this chain and in this position, the signal is considered to be wet because you're hearing the actual vinyl effect literally affect this sound, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna, right where it says drop an audio effect here, I'm going to right click and create a new chain, okay? But on this chain where it says drop audio effects here, I'm not gonna put any effect on there. I'm gonna leave it dry, okay? So what I can do is to stay organized, because this can get confusing if you leave both of these selected as just chain. I'm gonna right click on it and I'm gonna rename it dry, okay? And then on this chain, I'm gonna right click on it, rename it. And by the way, the key command for that is Command R, and rename this wet. So think of it like a dry wet knob. If you're not familiar with dry wet knobs, most audio effects, the good news is that most audio effects have them. Dry meaning that there's no effect at all, and then you can bring it all the way up to 100%, which would be 100% of the effect. You can mix and match it, so maybe 50%, etc. But what I want to create that with this vinyl. So what I need to do is open up the chain. And then inside this chain, you'll see what's called the chain select editor. So if I bring this wet knob all the way up, that means from here to here, you're going to get 100% of the wet effect. But on the dry, I want to actually be dry around 50% of the time. And what I can do, actually, let me just bring these all the way out. Because next to this chain selector, you have the zone editor. And in the zone editor, I can actually set it up with a fade, a custom fade, where it will behave like a dry wet knob, okay? You notice how you can't really hear that dustiness of the effect anymore if you're listening really closely. But my job isn't done yet. What I need to do now is I need to actually create the custom dry wet knob. And that's where this chain select ruler comes into play. So if I right click on this, okay, where it says map to macro 1, and go ahead and click on map to macro 1, and it will be renamed as chain selector, but I'm gonna rename this, and I'm actually gonna give it a custom color. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and rename this. I'm gonna call it my dry/wet knob. Okay, just like that. So now when I play this effect, or play the track with the effect, you're not hearing it at first, but as I bring it up, okay, now you're getting 100% of that wet effect. And I might need to dial the fades back a little bit so there's no, sometimes you might get like a little bit of phase cancellation, so I just need to, or an overlap, I mean, sorry. So let me go ahead and just bring this back. You have to experiment with this until you find something that you like. Make sure it works for you. Yeah. So again, if I wanted to custom map this, maybe hypothetically, I want the effect to start 100% wet. And then by the time it gets to the fifth bar, the fifth measure, I want it to be 100% dry. So again, I could just right click on this macro here. Show automation. 100% wet from here, 127. Go ahead and put a macro here, or sorry, automation point here. And then right here, put an automation point and bring it down like this. Okay. And I might want to make it a little faster, so I'll go ahead and put a nice curve, nice bend here. Okay. So from dry to wet. All right, so that's just one example of how you can use the chains and creating your own custom dry wet effects, especially with effects that don't have a dry wet knob, can be very beneficial. So the cool thing is, if I wanted to save this, if I wanted to maybe use this for future use, I really like the vinyl plugin. I like using it a lot, especially with lo-fi type music. What I can do is rename this, and I can call it my vinyl dry wet. I'm sure you could probably think of more creative names, but that's what I'm going to call it for now. And I can save this for later. So the cool thing is you can save your own custom audio effect racks. And by the way, could I add more to this? Absolutely. But for now, if I just want something for this isotope vinyl plugin with a dry wet knob, my job is done here. All I need to do now is click right here where it says save preset. And then automatically this will be saved into my presets folder under the audio effects, under the subfolder called audio effect rack. And you can see here, anytime you see the extension .adg, that stands for an Ableton device group. It could be a series of these effect racks together. It could just be a single audio effect rack. It could be a single MIDI effect rack. It could be a single instrument rack. But either or, anytime you see that extension, just know that there's definitely going to be some macros, and there's probably going to be a mix of things under the hood. And by the way, you can see here, I've already kind of started to build my own custom audio effect racks folder. So I have one for vocals, I have one for effects, I have one called Ableton Mastering. And even with this vinyl one, I would go ahead and probably put this in my effects rack like this, so I can access it later if I want to use it in future projects. Okay. All right, moving on. This is one of my favorites. This is velocity and key. So I already have, well, we're going to talk about velocity and key and how these you can do some fun things with this. But I already have some MIDI loaded in here, but I actually don't have any sounds yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up some fun vocal one-shot sounds. Again, these are actually from one of the packs in Ableton called VoiceBox. So for Ableton users, for Ableton 11 users that have the full suite, the VoiceBox section, there's a lot of fun sounds in here. But anyways, so here's this one sound called Fiona, playing the key C3, and she's the formant of the A vowel here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna literally just drag this in to the MIDI track, even though it's an audio clip, but it will automatically put it into what's called a simpler. Okay, so if this were, again, if we were in class together right now, we would talk about the simpler, we would go over the simpler. If you didn't have these sounds, I would give them to you so you'd have something to practice with in class. But let's just listen to this right now, the Fiona sound that's gonna just play with this MIDI. Okay, so what you're hearing is literally this one-shot sound playing all of these notes. Okay, all these notes that you're seeing here. All right, and I want to try to make it a little bit more interesting. And how I can do that is I can mix and match a lot of these sounds together. But check this out. So what I want to do is I want to create an instrument rack first and foremost in order to create more instruments inside this actual single simpler. And let me demonstrate. So if I hit Command G, once again, okay, I now have a built-in instrument rack, and I can go ahead and show my chain list, okay? And inside the chain list, it says drop an instrument or sample here. And I'm gonna do just that. I'm gonna find some other Fiona samples that she's playing in different accents. Okay. Let's just grab, let's just start with 2 for now. We'll start with 2 for now. So when I listen to both of these, this is the cool thing. So now we're hearing 2 sounds that are going to be layered, but guess what? They're going to be playing at the same time. So let me just play this. So just to prove that they're both playing, I'll go ahead and solo this one here. And now I'll solo this one. Okay. And right off the bat, there's already some cool things you can do here to try to mix these a little bit better, maybe create a little bit more space. And that is actually just right here where it says C and C. This is actually stands for, this is the chain pan. So if I wanted to pan one to the left a little bit and pan the other one to the right, I can do that. And I can also turn the volume down for each one. Okay, not bad. That's pretty cool. But what I really want to show you is the power of using velocity. Okay, with velocity, what you can do, and I love doing this because this is where you're, even if you start to write something melodic that you really enjoy, but you want to mix and match it with different sounds, especially in our sound design class, we talk about this. But if I go ahead and say, okay, look, the Fiona C, the top one that's hitting the vowel A, with the velocity chain, I'm going to say only from 72 to 127 will this note be activated. And then for the Fiona C3, the accent note or the vowel of O is only going to play from here to here. So from 1 to 72. But how do you set up the velocity, right? You might be wondering. Well, one of the awesome new features in Ableton Live 11 is right here where it says randomize. You can actually change the velocity range yourself manually by clicking down here and changing the velocity ranges. But what I really love to do is arbitrarily just set the randomize button, and it will output new suggestions and ideas that I personally wouldn't think to do myself. So if I click on this button here, watch, you're going to see the velocity change on all of these notes. Okay, you see this? They're all sporadic. They're all over the place. Now, you might think that's chaotic, and you might think like, oh no, did I just ruin the song? Not necessarily, because now when I play this, watch what happens. We'll actually just play it, and then I'll explain what's happening. Okay, versus this one. So that one's definitely louder. I'm sure you've noticed that, but you notice how it's it's almost too quantized. It doesn't really have a lot of movement, but then this one surprisingly does. And the other thing to point out is that you're not hearing both of these notes playing at the same time. What's happening is the notes that are ranging from 1 to 72, so all the notes that are ranging from 1 to 72 are only going to play the Fiona C3 that's hitting those O notes. Okay? And then the one that's hitting the A notes is only going to be playing from 72 and above. So you're not going to get them the whole time, which also makes this more interesting. Let's do another one. Let's actually try to make this a little bit more complex. So I'm going to take another one here. I'm going to take the use, U, and then I'm going to set this one from 1 to 24, and then this one from 24 to 40, this one from 40 to 72. Let's take one more for good measure. Let's take one more. And then this one from 72 to 127, okay? So now let's listen. See, versus if I didn't play around with the velocity settings in this instrument rack here, it would sound like this, just a bunch of vocal sounds on top of each other and it can start to sound messy. So this is what it sounds like with no velocity changes, as you can see here. No velocity changes whatsoever. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not as interesting as this, right? I think we can all agree on that. Right? So using the velocity to mix and match parts, and also for live programming. So if you have a keyboard, this wouldn't work on your laptop keyboard, but if you actually have a piano keyboard, MIDI keyboard that has a velocity sensitivity, and what is velocity again? So when I'm pressing down on keys, okay, how hard I'm pressing down on those keys, how fast I'm striking down on those keys, okay, when I do that, the harder I strike down, the more the velocity is going to jump up, okay? So you could actually do this, and if any of you who like to play the piano, you could set up these instrument racks. So the light notes that you play on your piano keyboard would only play certain samples. And then the harder you strike it will actually play different samples. So there's a lot of things you can do with velocity, and we talk about this in our Ableton classes, where you can use velocity not to just to modulate the amplitude, but you can use it to modulate LFOs. You can use it to modulate filters, subtractive synthesis. You can actually use it to modulate a lot of things, pitch, envelopes, etc., etc., etc. But this is actually pretty unique because you literally are assigning different instruments to different velocity chains, which I think is just like super fun to do. Okay, let me show you another one. And this one is using key. Okay, so let me go ahead and bring the velocity back on all of these to here. So let's say I want all of these sounds. And let's add a couple of more. Let's add Fiona Long. And let's add one of her friends, Philip. Yeah, let's add Philip in the mix. Okay, so you can see I have a bunch here, okay? But let's go to key now. So with key mapping, this is interesting because what you can do, it's very similar to velocity, except you can actually, rather than relying on velocity, you can tell Ableton, or not tell Ableton, but you can assign certain instruments to certain keys. Okay, so for example, let me just go ahead and fold this down so I can see what I'm working with here. Between G3 and E1 is where I can experiment with this, at least with these MIDI notes. You can always add more MIDI notes later if you want, but for now I'm just going to keep this pretty simple and straightforward. So with these notes here, what I can do is say, okay, from E1 to E2, I'm only going to have certain notes play. Okay, and then above that, let's say from E3 to G3, I'm only going to have certain notes play or certain instruments play. So how do I set that up? Okay, so let's say this Philip one here. See, right now when I play this, you're going to hear everything. Let me just show you what it sounds like when you don't play around with the velocity. It's not bad, but it's pretty messy, right? It's pretty messy. So let's make this more interesting. Okay, so from E1 to E2. Okay, here we go. So from E1, and I'm going to slide this here. E1 to E2. And yeah, you might find this kind of, some of this might feel a little tedious, but, this is something that you'll learn. If you want to create your own music and you want to create your own sounds and you want to customize things, sometimes this is what you got to do. Okay. But it also should be fun. It's fun to experiment and just play around with different ideas and see what you can come up with. Things that you wouldn't normally do. Okay, so I just went ahead and took all of these sounds. Maybe, you know what? Let's split it up. Let's keep it even here. So these three are dedicated between E1 and, let's see, where's my cutoff here? C3. Let's just make sure that I'm not overlapping Actually, let's just go to, with these, I'm just going to go, because, yeah, I'm just going to go to B2 on these. Okay. So let's go to B2. And you can see right here, it'll show you as you move the chain selector, B2, in the zone editor, B2. Okay, and then this one, C3, there we go, C3, and then C3. Okay, so let me play this. And then maybe this one I'll say, okay, only these notes, and then this one only these notes. And then this one only those notes. So you might notice that some of these notes might get pitched a little wonky. If I play the Philip one, it's literally only playing the notes in this range, but the good news is, because these are all individual simplers, by the way. The good news is that you can come and over into the simpler itself, and you can experiment with the controls. So for example, I might go ahead and transpose this up 12 semitones. It's just a little bit too dark. There we go. And then maybe this one too. Oh no, that one sounds fine actually. So you can see it gets a lot brighter here and louder. Louder doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing, okay? If you feel like, oh, this is cool sounding, but can we turn it up? Absolutely, okay? You can always go over here and then turn up the volume here, or you can use a utility. Okay, so imagine the possibilities. I just want you to think about this for a moment, because even using, you know, these kind of, I'll admit, they're kind of like goofy, funny sounds. They're just like a bunch of little vocal one-shots. But don't forget that when you do these things, okay, let me just show you one more thing, and then we'll move on here. If I load in any instrument, okay, whether it's third party, these are all Ableton instruments, but let me show you something. You can mix and match. So let's say I have Ableton's operator, okay? And then I go ahead and hit Command G and load it in as an instrument, right? Okay, where it says operator, and if I were to just play a single note, okay, that's it. But I can also be going over to my third-party samples and maybe load in something cool like this free Spitfire audio engine called Labs. Okay, I can load in one of our partners here, Pigments from Arturia. So the cool thing, what I'm trying to demonstrate is that you can have multiple instruments loaded in, and it doesn't matter if it's an Ableton native instrument or a third-party instrument. Okay, and again, you can play around with the panning on all of these, the volume, and then you can get inside here under the velocity zone editor or the key editor or chain editor and start experimenting even more. And we haven't even dived into the macro section yet, which I'm about to go into right now. Okay. So macro mapping and saving. How do you do it, and why would you want to do it, right? So I have some effects here. I have this auto filter. I have this cathedral huge preset. This is a reverb preset from Ableton's hybrid reverbs. Again, one of the newer, cooler audio effects. And then their newly updated Redux engine here with a built-in preset. So all of these effects, let me just turn them off for a moment here so you can hear what I'm working with. Okay, so I have this loop. Let's go ahead and play it. Okay. Okay, just a drum loop, right? And then let's say I want this auto filter to modulate over time, where it starts, let's say I want to build this up so it's going to be an 8-bar intro, right? Okay, and I wanted to do that, but then I also want this cathedral huge sound to also come in. Okay, with this dry wet knob that you can see, and then I also want this redux to be part of the mix. Okay, but I want to control all of those at once. All right, so sure, could I, for those of you who are familiar with automation, could we just go through and automate each one of those individually? Absolutely, absolutely. But what if we just turn it into an audio effect rack and then set one macro to control all three of those dry wet knobs? Wouldn't that be easier, right? In theory. So again, and spoiler alert, the answer is yes. But what I want to show you is how you can do that by literally, it's super simple, but yet very effective. Highlight all three of these effects like this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring the dry wet knob back, by the way, down on all of these. So they're all starting at 0 here. Okay. And then highlight all of them by holding down the shift key, Command G into an audio effect rack, right? So you can do that with multiple sounds. You can do it with one at a time, but I'm going to put them all onto one audio effect rack, okay? And then I'm now going to open these up here where it says to the show hide device. And I'm going to use a macro to control this auto filter's high pass filter cutoff, this Cathedral Huge hybrid reverb's dry wet knob, and this vintage sampler's dry wet knob, okay? So how do I do that? Click on the thing that you want to modulate. In this case, this is the filter frequency cutoff knob. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to say map to macro 1. Okay, not done yet. I come over to the Cathedral Huge sound where it says dry wet. I right click on that and I also say map to macro 1. But be careful because you might not be able to see where it says map to macro 1. It'll say map to frequency. It's not technically mapping to the frequency. What happened was when I mapped this frequency knob to macro 1, it got renamed as the frequency knob. So what I'm going to do is, before I move on, just so I don't get confused, and if this happens to you, you might as well do this as well. Right click on it and then rename. And then again, I'm just going to call it my dry wet knob. Keeping it simple. Okay. Now let's move on. I'm going to go back to this dry wet knob, right click on it. And now I'm going to map to the dry wet. Okay. So now anytime you see these tiny little green dots here, that's letting you know that these have been mapped to a macro knob. Okay. And now I'm going to also do it to the Redux here, the Redux engine dry wet knob. I'm going to right click on this, map to the dry wet knob. Okay. And now check it out. I have control over all of these things at once. You can see as I move the dry wet knob, you'll see that the filter frequency knob moves, the dry wet knob for the reverb moves, and the dry wet knob for the vintage Redux also moves. So now when I play these drums, okay, you're hearing a combination of all three. But if you're not satisfied with the results, and this can happen, where you say to yourself, you're like, I like the high pass with the Redux that comes in, but I'm not really hearing my Cathedral Huge sound anymore. Is there a way to customize these sounds so that maybe, just maybe, the Cathedral Huge sound starts at 50%? Or maybe there's a certain cutoff with the auto filter, so the auto filter only goes to about 559 hertz rather than all the way to 19,000, because if I go to 19,000, you can't even hear the sound anymore. I don't want that. Can we set the limits? And the answer is yes. And this is where you get into a little bit more advanced customization, but it's worthwhile, especially if you're trying to get, if you have something in your mind and there's certain results you're going for, this is something to consider. So I'm going to right click on the actual the macro knob itself. And then I'm going to go to where it says edit the actual mapping itself. Okay. So you'll see here where it says note control panel. And then in here, actually, I changed my mind. Sorry, I'm not going to do it like that. Sorry, scratch that. Because this is live, if I could edit this video, this would have been edited out. But that's the exciting thing about doing these live streams, is that sometimes I'm like, you know what? I changed my mind here. But no, what I'm going to do instead is I'm actually going to go to this knob here, right click on it, and then go to edit the MIDI mapping itself. Okay. Sorry, hold on. The macro control. Sorry, macro control, not MIDI mapping. What is MIDI mapping for, by the way? And this is something I did in the last video series talking about DJing with Ableton Live, is actually mapping your hardware units. So what I want is to map the macro controls, okay? And you can see that in that drop-down menu. So with the dry wet knob, so here you have the macros themselves, dry wet, the paths, okay, auto filter, cathedral huge, vintage sampler, the name of the thing that's actually being modulated, the frequency knob, the dry wet knobs for both of these, okay? So right here it says minimum and maximum. I'm happy with the minimum set value, but the maximum value I want to change. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring that down, like I said, to around 500, between 500 and 600. And then on the cathedral huge, the minimum, I'm gonna start at 20%. And then with the vintage sampler, I'm actually happy with that. So let's go ahead and click off mapping now. And you'll hear the results be a little bit different. So let's go ahead and hit play. Yeah. That's what I wanted. Okay. That's what I wanted. I just wanted to hear the cathedral reverb be pushed a little bit more in the mix. And then I wanted the auto filter not to cut off all the way. And I'll prove that by showing you. Look, if I take the dry wet knob and crank it all the way up to 127, which is 100%, it's the highest you can go. Look where it stops. It stops at 648 hertz, right where I set up that custom macro mapping, okay? And you can do this with anything that's in the color green here, in the shade green, is fair game, okay? So yeah, this is really cool. And again, if I want to customize some more things, maybe I want to add some more macros to these things. Like let's say, for example, it would be cool to have some of these macros for, maybe I want to change the rate here on this vintage sampler, but I also want to change the decay time on the cathedral huge at the same time. How do I do that? Just demonstrate one more time. On this decay knob, I'm going to right click on it, map to macro 2. And you'll see right now it's being renamed as decay. And then let's go ahead and let me give you a couple examples. Decay, and then on this rate knob, I'm going to right click on that, map to this one as well. Okay, so I'm just going to call this is my hybrid. Okay. Give it a different color. And then on this one, I'm going to rename it. I'm going to put it on map to macro 2, bit depth. I'm just going to rename it. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to call it bits. Okay. I'm going to change the color once again. All right. So I have all these colors, and now I can play around with these settings. Okay. You can really start to experiment and have fun here. And so when you collapse all these things, a lot of times when you're looking at audio effect racks or MIDI effect racks or instrument racks, here it is, okay? You can have a ton of different macros. And don't forget that you have macro variations. So let's say I start with something that's just kind of dry, okay? This would be my first macro variation, dry, okay? And then let's do a new one now where I go ahead and bring this up, bring this one up here, and then bring this one here, maybe here, and then say new. So now I have variation 1, variation 2, variation 1. And then you can also use this randomized macro control value knob. So if you click on this, if you're looking for something more experimental or something to just give you some suggestions that you want to think do on your own, click on this random button, and then it will automatically give you different results every single time. And if you like one of the random sections, like if you click random and it gives you a suggestion, you're like, ooh, I really like this, then you can create it as a variation. And by the way, one of the newer features in Ableton Live 11, prior to Ableton Live 11, and by the way, if you're not using Ableton Live 11, this isn't to give you a case of FOMO, but having 8 macro controls is a lot, because within those 8 macro controls, you can, as I just demonstrated, you can assign more than one thing to one macro. Okay, so with that being said, for anyone who's not using Ableton Live 11, you have 8 macro controls and you can do so much customization. But guess what? And for those of you who are using Ableton Live 11, you can actually add more macro controls now. Okay, you can add up to 16, which to me, that's crazy, but crazy in a fun way. Where now that just opens up even more possibilities. And by the way, you can actually take these variations and now you can set up different macro variations. So this is why Ableton, I think, is one of the best digital audio workstations, because on the surface, they try to make things as simple as possible to have technology get out of your way so you can keep creating, keep making things. And at the same time, if you want to go down the rabbit hole and explore all these different possibilities, it doesn't end, and it's really, really fun. Okay, so again, this was just a demonstration on instrument racks, audio effects racks, Midi Effect Racks, and how to create custom chains, velocity in key sections, macro mapping, custom labeling, and then saving your racks. Okay, so I hope this demystified this for you a little bit, okay, and understanding the possibilities here. Thank you for tuning in. But before we go, one last thing I just wanted to show you is if you go over to our actual website, technically, if you type in edu.garnishmusicproduction.com, this is where you can find out more about one of our satellite schools, okay, from San Francisco all the way to Hong Kong. And also, right now we're offering for live online courses 33% off. Okay, over here you can find more of our streams. We are always uploading new streams and giving you creative suggestions, tips, and tricks, not just in Ableton, but other DAWs as well. But in the live online course section, you can learn more about one of our programs, from the 360 Academy to the producer programs, and all the different types of classes we offer, to some of our more custom classes, from electronic essentials to cinematics to hip hop production. And yeah, if you have any questions about our school, or any questions in regards to using Ableton, feel free to hit us up. And yeah, I just want to thank you again for tuning in. I will be back again soon to explore some more fun techniques and creative tips using Ableton Live. Again, my name is Zach Johnson. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and I will talk to you all again soon.